Charlie Munger, one of the smartest business people to ever live, died this week at 99 years old. Given how brilliant and generous he was in teaching, I thought it'd be appropriate to remember Mr. Munger by sharing the two greatest lessons I think he shared for us small business owners. Stay tuned to hear what they are.
Running a service business can be hard. It is not unusual for business owners in industries like contracting, home repair, auto repair, business-to-business services like janitorial, IT and accounting, and many others to feel overwhelmed by all the priorities facing them at any given time. Between addressing the needs of the customers, managing the employees, figuring out the financials, and getting processes in place, feeling like you're making significant progress on your business journey can be difficult. Welcome to Service Industry Success, hosted by Brian Harding. Each week, Brian will look at real-world strategies for building the business you are dreaming of, while also sharing tactics to get through some of the most frustrating parts of business ownership with a lot more ease. Let's get started.
So if you don't know, Charlie Munger died this week. He was 99 years old. He's known as Warren Buffett's right-hand man, which I'm not sure how accurate that is. He's a major player in Berkshire Hathaway, the company that Warren Buffett, of course, has built. Both Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger were from Omaha, Nebraska. Charlie grew up in the Great Depression in Nebraska when he was young. And to be clear, he was rarely, if ever, speaking to small business owners. We did the tons of speaking. Like he has famous speeches he did at Harvard, and he did tons of interviews in tons of different formats and settings. He's got there's just a huge variety of things on YouTube and other places you can see videos he's done. I think he's just he's a super smart guy, but tons of wisdom, great sense of humor, very pragmatic. Again, he grew up in the Dust Bowl, essentially during the Depression. Huge proponent of avoiding risk. He shared so much. I mean, he was just completely an open book on business, essentially. That anyone listening would be able to come up with their own versions of what they thought the best things he ever shared were. This isn't I'm not intending this episode to be the two things that I think are the most important things he said. I just think they're like two of the greatest lessons for small business owners that at least that resonate with me. And so it could just be because these are things I value more than other folks do, or who knows. I think he was such a smart person, and I don't know that there's a ton more people. There's a handful of people who are like this, who just openly give their knowledge to anyone who will listen. He's just a guy who would share tremendous amounts of knowledge and not really expect anything back. And I think he was a great guy. So without much further explanation, and real quick, I mean, he's like a multi-billionaire. Berkshire Hathaway is just, again, it's Warren Buffett's company. It's worth an immense amount of money. They're the biggest shareholder in companies like Coca-Cola and Geico and other household names. And they built a tremendous empire. And he talks about in these things, not just, how financing works on Wall Street, but he talks about things that are practical for all of us. So one of the first of the two things I'm going to talk about today is he described continuing education and continuing learning as not only as an imperative, but a moral duty, which is an interesting way to put that. I've literally heard him use the words, it's a moral duty to not allow yourself to be ignorant. And I think he says his grandfather considered a moral duty to not allow yourself to be stupid, I think is how he puts it. But he was a voracious reader. I think he's known for reading like a book a day or 5 books a week, or a tremendous amount of time and energy and effort put into just consuming information to just get better. I can hardly recall a time I listened to him talk where he didn't speak about the absolute necessity of gaining new knowledge and skills. And in previous roles I've had, as well as my current role, I can tell you that I've learned that there's a tremendous gap in outcomes and potential outcomes between those who want to learn to be better and those who want others to be better. I'm going to pause there for a second and kind of reiterate this. There's a tremendous difference between people who are interested in becoming better and people who expect others to be better. And we see this in small companies because there's not very many people. So if you only have 40 people or 20 people or 8 people around, it doesn't take long to figure out who is expected to get better and who isn't. And I can just tell you from where I've been around very successful people as peers, as business owners, and now in my role of helping business owners, the ones who embrace personally gaining knowledge, personally gaining new skills, and implementing those skills and utilizing those skills and that knowledge, the outcomes they get are off the charts different than people who say, yeah, that's all great stuff, but the employees really need to figure this out or whatever. um, we hear sayings like, what got me here won't get me there. Like the skills that got me to where I am today are great, but they're not the same skills that will get me where I want to go. But the true difference from my perspective is between those who seek to gain knowledge with the purpose of utilizing this new knowledge to make real improvements to move forward versus those who gain knowledge so they can proclaim to be right or have superior knowledge to others. Those are very different uses for this knowledge. So it's kind of like again, this is not a new concept. The thing I'm talking about today is not a new concept at all. It's been around for thousands of years, I'm sure. But there's a difference between learning to gain new skills and get better versus learning in the hopes of being validated. I think that's a common way that that's discussed as well. And you've heard me talk about coming to my own conclusion myself at one time that I had a choice, and it kind of hit me like a 2x4 upside the head because I'm kind of a stubborn, hard-headed person at times. And it became clear, like, look, dude, you can either be successful or you can be right. But those two things are not always on the same path. And it's important that we understand when we're trying to be better so we can be successful, and when we have an expectation that other folks just kind of figure it out. And in small businesses, it's a challenge because we have to rely on other people to do things. But there's a difference between relying on people to do things because we're helping set them up for success versus we expect them to figure it out because it shouldn't be my problem. And that is something that is just, again, it's not a business owner problem, it's a human problem. And many of the problems that are human problems manifest themselves um, quite spectacularly when you're a small business owner. And I think this is one of them. So um, people I am friends with who have very successful businesses have similar stories. A friend of mine tells me how he started his business, and he was a very small company, himself and a couple of employees for many years. And he was just kind of set in his ways, and he was very rigid on how he did things. And finally, he had an epiphany, much like I did. And he finally said, this is silly. Like, there's people who have this figured out. Why won't I listen to them? They're trying to help me, and I keep telling them, no, I'm going to do it my way. And I can do it my way, or I can do it their way. And their way is clearly producing better results. So why am I resisting this? And I think for many of us, we have to have, it takes what it takes for us to have that epiphany. It certainly took a great deal of frustration and anxiety for me to come to that conclusion as well. So the sooner we can get there, like, the better for everyone. But I can tell you that I have been around people in again previous roles where, as a business owner, working in an industry, being an industry associate. I remember calling one of my partners from a meeting where we were at an industry association, and I won't, of course, share what the industry association was, but I literally called him at like 10 o'clock at night and said, I'm telling you, we're going to be rich. I'm listening to these people who are our competitors. I'm hearing them talk, and I'm hearing them say these things. And these things that they're saying are so not productive. Like, we are going to be rich. I'll never forget that phone call. It was like 10 o'clock at night. I might have woke him up out of bed. It struck me that these people had an expectation of being successful. They just had a list of things that they weren't going to do. And sometimes we don't have a verbal list we give, but we are just not willing to take the knowledge that is available to us and get better. And instead we kind of put that on other folks. So that's one of the big ones. The second one is identifying and avoiding our own biases. So Charlie Munger has an entire speech he gave, I think it was 1995, somewhere around there, to Harvard Law or just Harvard or something like that. And it's something like 25 or 24 biases. And in that context, he's talking about like biases that also help sell, like there's social proof and things like that. He used different words than we use now, but we know now about part of the reason reviews work so well is because it's social proof. And so he talks about things like that that are not negative necessarily. So I'm not meaning to conflate the two things, but he also talks a great deal about identifying when our own bias is not leading us down a good path. So identifying when something is actually likely to happen or not likely to happen versus this thing is hopefully going to happen because that's what I want. Like identifying when those things are different is a crucial skill in business and in life, of course, also. But being honest and open to really trying to find the truth. When is this thing that I want to happen just a thing I want to happen, but it's not really likely versus this is a thing that is very likely to happen and I'm removing my own biases. I can't, like, the list of times I've learned this lesson the hard way we don't have time in this episode for me to go through them. You've heard me talk about how I've learned this with marketing. We spent an obscene amount of money, hundreds of thousands of dollars on marketing that didn't work. And looking back now, our strategy was completely hope. Hope was our strategy. Like, it was very clear looking back, like, how could you think this was going to work? And the answer is because we wanted it to. That's how we thought it was going to work, is because we really wanted it to work. When I used to do a different version of a podcast where I would interview business owners who had been successful, and I would ask them, basically a handful of questions like, what would you tell other business owners to do to learn from things you did well? And basically, what would you tell other business owners to learn from things you didn't do well? The number one thing, I think all but one or two of the guests I ever had on that podcast, the number one thing that they all said was their biggest mistake was keeping employees too long. So, or keeping poor employees too long. And so I look at this example again, like there's employees I look back now, it's like, of course they weren't going to make it. There was no chance they were going to make it. What would make you think that they were going to make it? Well, because I really wanted them to. That's why. And again, in hindsight, you're just like, of course it wasn't going to work. But it would have meant I would have had to do other things, and I would have had to not work that late that day to figure out how we're going to put the ad, and I got to do that instead of this. And there's all these reasons, right? So employees not making it or who are never going to make it is another example. There's times where customers were right about something I was really resisting. There's times where people are like, hey, this isn't working. I'm like, no, this is the way it's got to be. And then in hindsight, like, why did it have to be that way? Well, because that's what I wanted. That's why, because I had a bias towards having it that way. People of all kinds not changing poor behaviors. This could be customers not paying their bills. Like I promise from this moment forward, I'm going to pay my bills on time. And then 3 months later, you're having the same conversation on the same phone with the same person, and their invoice is 30 days late. And you're like, I thought we covered this. Like, this wasn't going to happen. Well, this time it's my dog ate my checkbook or whatever it is. Learning that people who just have these patterns of behaviors are not going to change these patterns of behaviors. Like, but again, my bias was towards that they would, of course, because it would make my life easier if they would just change versus acknowledging they weren't going to change. Another example, sticking with broken processes for too long because I thought the time it would take to fix the process that was broken was a bigger hassle than fixing the consequences of the broken process. We go through this where it's like, well, yeah, I know this thing isn't working, but I just take care of it when it's not working. And that seems like an easier or better solution than actually figuring out why the process is broken and fixing that. And of course, that's not scalable. We know that, but we don't know how to write procedures. We don't know how to develop processes. We don't know the questions asked, and we don't know the stuff. So our bias tells us it's okay that we continue on this path. When of course it's not okay to continue on that path. Of course we can't do it that way. Warren Buffett, Charlie Munger's partner, has also said that one of the best things, and I think he did say specifically here, small business owners, but one of the best things small business owners can do is to learn to fail fast, meaning identify when something is not going to work as soon as possible. The sooner we figure out this thing is really not going to work, And part of that is removing our own bias and removing our own desires for the outcome versus what is the pragmatic, like real, honest truth here. And so I think that those are the two things that I would say out of the countless hours of audio that Charlie Munger has put out. And again, I just think he's a fantastic guy to listen to. I really like his humor. I like his pragmatism. I like that he's, a Midwestern kind of traditional guy who just did really well. He had tons of adversity he had to overcome in life. He was not handed billions of dollars by any stretch. Super smart guy. And then later in life, just like super generous in helping people. I just think he's a fantastic guy. If you've never listened to him, I would definitely recommend carving out some time to listen to some of the things he says. I think he's really brilliant. Anyhow, again, the question for us then is, so what is our plan to learn and gain new knowledge and skills? Like what's our plan to do that? It's one thing to talk about things like, I know what got me here won't get me there. It's one thing to say that stuff, but what is our actual plan? What's our strategy? What are we actually doing? What's the actions we're taking to gain new knowledge and skills? And how are we learning to identify and overcome biases that are likely to lead us down an unproductive path? I think those are two things that we should always be aware of. Add that to your list of 63 things to be aware of for sure. I know that there's a long list of those kinds of things, but I think that these are a couple that along these two can work. You can kill two birds with one stone. You can do these two things and other things and make a lot of progress here. So I think we can all shorten our learning curve by taking suggestions given by those who have accomplished a great deal in their lives. And Charlie Munger certainly qualifies as the guy who did that. He had many. There's tons of stuff. I think these are just two that are, I think, are in my view, are absolutely massive. So thank you, Charlie, for being an absolute legend and learning and dispensing invaluable business knowledge. Thank you for taking the time to do all that. Again, I think he's a great guy. So check him out if you haven't had a chance and ask yourself these two questions. What am I doing to continue learning new skills and abilities? And what am I doing to identify and overcome the biases that are likely to lead me down an unproductive path? So that's it for this week. I'll talk to you all next week.